Paul Trombley.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
You ready to go, Tom?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Good morning and welcome to Election Day 2024. The day is finally here, and it's also time to greet Tom Ostrom for Rochester Today. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Andy.
Boy, oh boy. I'm actually thankful that the day is finally here. We can finally find out what is actually going to happen.
Right.
And, the suspense is killing me, but we'll have results on KROCnews.com late tonight, the local races. I anticipate, we can talk about this later, I don't think we'll know the results of the presidential race for maybe perhaps a day or two. Who knows?
Right, and we'll be talking about that on the Thursday show then, but
for sure.
Right now.
Okay.
I'm glad you got a chance to see your Vikings successful from your bird's eye view, and meanwhile the Packers had a horrible rainstorm at Lambeau Field, and they got swept away in it.
I tell you what, that Detroit team is looking like the real deal this year. They're just dominant. And for them to shellac the Packers the way they did at Lambeau, I think they're a force to be reckoned with if they don't have some key injuries. They're playing really well.
Yeah, the Lions. And of course, it's a tough league. Your Vikings are doing well, and the Lions are doing well. And I found the Green Bay quarterback, Love, I don't know why they kept him in that long, because he's still got that groin injury. Shows every time the camera would be on him, he'd be limping a little bit. I don't know why they don't replace him when that's happening. If he gets injured again, that could be a season ending.
Yeah, and the Vikings... the first half of that game was disappointing, to say the very least. They came back in the second half and did what they needed to do, but they, looking at that Indianapolis team, the Vikings should have just trounced them. They didn't. I mean, the score didn't really reflect what was happening. But,
right.
It's quite the experience to go to a game up at US Bank Stadium at night. It's a different atmosphere. I will say this. I don't know, it's about 70,000 people packed into that place.
Wow.
And I did not witness any misbehaviors going on. Maybe a few people had a little bit too much to drink, but I didn't see anybody who was just completely intoxicated. I'm sure there were. There were 70,000 people there. And I can only see what I can see. But there wasn't really any tension, Tom. People were getting along. This is just a couple days away from what is being described as the most divisive election in modern U.S. history, and there was absolutely no evidence of that at all in that crowd at that stadium. People were together. They were having a good time. They were getting along, enjoying cheering on their team together, and it's certainly, when you listen to the media and look at social media and the narrative those outfits try to promote, and the language used in describing how divided our nation is and how we're on the edge of catastrophe, it's pretty dang ominous. It was good to see that thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans can get together and just enjoy themselves without that having to be part of the what is happening at that time.
You bet.
Okay, what is in that mailbag?
Branko, and it's true. The Democrats, Kamala, fear, fear, fear. Trump's a Hitler.
Yeah.
And the Trump campaign, fight, 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 make America great. And then the nation, the Babylon Bee satire, the nation now anxiously awaits to see which side will be denying the election results first. The country's deeply divided, they say, but we have to see now which side argues rigging and stealing of elections. And then Branko. Trump just keeps going, and Branko's got him designed as the Energizer bunny, but in his back are arrows sticking out. Phony impeachment, assassination attempts, lawfare, media lies, but Trump keeps going the Energizer bunny. And then from Phil, campaign signs for the Democrats. Gang members for Harris. Drug trafficking for Harris. Gang members and shoplifters for Harris. Illegal aliens for Harris. And I would add sex child traffickers for Harris. And and then from Wayne, why would the U.S. Attorney General try to prevent removal of non-citizens from voting rolls in Virginia? These people are self-identified as non-citizens. Furthermore, this Virginia law was passed years ago by a Democrat legislature with a Democrat governor. If Trump is not elected, we can blame the pseudo-journalists who are far-left liberals. Facts don't matter. Hating Trump is what matters. That's the mailbag.
Oh, good. On that, we didn't really talk about that much, that removal of those names from the ballot in those two states and how they had to go all the way up the chain of the courts to get rulings to allow them to do that, which was fascinating to me because it would seem like common sense would prevail, that these voters were not qualified. They identified themselves as non-citizens and never should have been allowed to receive a ballot or be registered to vote. But the legal argument was that there's a federal law that would supersede the Virginia law that wouldn't allow those sorts of measures to be taken within 60 days of an election. And I never did read what the Supreme Court ruling actually said, but apparently they decided, thankfully, that common sense prevails, that you would look at this issue and say, this isn't a situation where you are potentially stripping a citizen of their right to vote. You are looking at folks who filled out a form and identified themselves as non-citizens but still were somehow allowed to register. So I found it fascinating that it took that long to remedy that situation. Okay, we have to take a break already, and we'll be back in a moment with more of Rochester Today on this Election Day 2024 on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Welcome back, everyone. Rochester Today, kind of at least starting out a dreary election day. Very wet here in southeastern Minnesota for Election Day 2024. But what do you have for us, Tom, to start going with Minnesota related topics?
Dark forbidding skies. How vicious the Democrats are. That's all they've got in this campaign. And we have an attorney general supposed to represent all of the people saying, make America great again means a return to segregation, to Jim Crow. And then other Democrats in the state called Trump names that I can't repeat on your family show, Andrew. But the Attorney General Ellison, elect Trump and it's a return to segregation. He didn't do anything like he's being accused of when he was president. I don't understand, but that's the hate. That's the hate they have. And then they're saying that Madison Square Garden, and Ellison agrees, and some Democrats do in the state, that was a location for Nazi rallies in the past, and so they associate this one with that. But Madison Square Garden has been the site of rallies and political events for decades, including Democrat and Republican national conventions. And the Democrat National Convention was held there 3 times. in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So how they get away with this hate stuff, it shows they don't have much.
I read a piece, Tom. It was a guy in the Wall Street Journal who traveled across the country over the past few months, talking to voters in dozens of states, hundreds of people, trying to get a pulse on what's happening out there politically. And one of his assessments of that message of extremism by Trump or accusations headed the other way towards Harris was that the vast majority of Americans are just ignoring it. That they're weighing the issues based upon what's happening in their lives. And he's saying vast majority, but he also wrote that those who are heavily invested, obviously, are buying into those messages one way or the other. But for the average voter, it's not resonating. That was his take.
Well, again, the masses are more intelligent than the so-called experts and movers and shakers. Obama and others are saying people of color should vote for Kamala, but it's just astonishing that people of color who aren't going to. Hispanics are, and lots of blacks are going to vote for Trump. And Alpha News had a picture. Must be 25 Muslims here standing behind a podium that says, Trump, make America great again. There are about 20 males and a few females, many of them dressed in Muslim garb, their traditional garb, and they're standing with a sign by them. This is in Minnesota. Somali for Trump. The priorities, we want public safety, we want school choice, we want the fentanyl crisis dealt with, we want the economy dealt with, and we want peace. We want the end of these wars. And that's amazing to me. A picture of many Muslims outspoken for Trump. And the Somali American leaders in Minnesota endorsed Trump. They slammed Democrats. The Democrats are really in trouble if they lose these minority votes. But the Somalis generally are family values people and quite conservative, and they like Trump too.
It's hard to gauge that because how many people do these Somali leaders represent? Or are they on the edge of the Somali population? I don't know. I'm just, it's facts I'm not aware of. I don't know how much influence they have within that community. But
it's even happening with a 40 that is surprising.
No, you're right. That alone is notable. And it could have an impact. But the other interesting part about that is while that took place, it didn't really get any coverage as far as what you would consider the mainstream media, the Twin Cities television stations, the Star Tribune. I don't think I saw a single mention of it.
Well, you know why. That's shielding the public from this reality.
Over the weekend, election-related discussion here, watching the college football games on Saturday, and I think it was Iowa. No, it was Nebraska versus UCLA. So this is on the Big Ten Network on cable television, and tons and tons of political ads purchased by or for candidates running for office in both Nebraska and in California. And in Nebraska, it's a really interesting race. This is a U.S. Senate race, and you have the Republican incumbent running against a guy who is campaigning as an independent and has not said who he would caucus with if he were to win. And he is sending what appears to be a pro-Trump message in his campaign because Nebraska being a very red state. And apparently he's making inroads against this incumbent Republican. And his ads, I will say this, were brilliant. Portraying this guy. And apparently his background is he's just an everyday guy. Came from the trades. And shows him campaigning, holding on to a can of beer and And it wasn't a negative campaign at all. It was issues-oriented type advertisements. And the Republican candidate, endorsed candidate running against them was, I guess, touting her endorsement by Trump himself and putting that center stage, including a video of Trump saying, vote for this person, not this independent. This is the person. But it was just an interesting dynamic in Nebraska. But then you went to the California commercials. You think the commercials we see here for the races in Minnesota are nasty? Oh my gosh, it's just cutthroat. These commercials were just nightmarish commercials. It was, you almost reeled back when they came on. It was just amazing. So there must be some competitive races happening in California as well, pitting some of these were congressional races, congressional candidates, Republicans versus Democrats, throwing just the nastiest accusations back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. KROC News website, Aaron Galloway put it on the website. November 1 was the posting. Minneapolis police are investigating early morning shootings and gunshot wounds near the University of Minnesota campus. Friday morning, the shooting happened off campus, and local authorities are reminding people to stay vigilant and watch for suspicious action. So there's still a lot of unrest in the Twin Cities.
Certainly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just check out any news item. The idea that there's some sort of reduction in crime seems ludicrous in light of the continued activity we're seeing by law enforcement dealing with issues not only in the Twin Cities, but even statewide. But much, obviously much more intense in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Yeah. And from the KROC News website, nearly 1 million ballots, and this was a November 2nd article, nearly 1 million ballots cast so far in Minnesota, and a lot of thousands of ballots haven't been returned yet. It says the Minnesota Secretary of State's office said more than 350,000 Minnesotans cast ballots ahead of the election, and they think the number of accepted ballots is around 900,000 now. And again, thousands have not returned yet. And it's too late now. The voting is over, but quite a statistical event there.
Yeah. Well, actually, to give you an update, Tom, as of this morning, that number was up to 1.1 million early votes. And the phenomena is fascinating to me because at the government center and at the Olmsted County Elections Office out by the federal prison, every day starting late last week, there have been long lines of people waiting to cast their early vote, which to me seems to more or less defeat the purpose of voting early, because I thought it would be to avoid the lines on election day. Mm-hmm. But it seems, from what witnesses have told me who have observed this, the lines may have actually been longer at these early voting sites than they would have been at your local polling place on election day. Mm-hmm. But part of it is because you instead of going in and doing the simple registration verification on the little iPad or whatever they use, you have to fill out some sort of form. So it's a little bit slower process to do that early voting than it would be to go to your regular polling place. Yeah. But people were so anxious to get their votes in, apparently, they were willing to stand in line for a half hour or an hour in order to cast an early vote.
And that shows that the public is very concerned about issues. They're very well informed, and you wonder if that's to the Republican advantage in vote tallies than to the Democrats, if the rebellion against what is going on now.
We'll find out, right? It's hard to know who is showing up early. I mean, as far as which direction they plan to vote, in the presidential race, or what issue is prompting them to vote. I haven't seen anybody trying to do exit polling in Minnesota, but I would expect, at least in Minnesota, that Minnesota is going to go for Harris. I think the odds of Trump taking Minnesota are extraordinarily slim, but you never ever know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll take our break and check in with the newsroom, and we'll return with more of Rochester Today on this Election Day 2024 on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96
FM.
Good morning. Welcome back. Rochester Today, Tuesday, Election Day 2024 with Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell. And what do you want to start with on the national news front?
Former Republican Congressman Gil Gutnick sent me a copy of his column, which appeared recently in Town Hall.
I read this piece. It's pretty funny.
It is. And Gil says that the Democrat side has a campaign about nothing. They don't talk about the issues, what was done, what needs to be done. They just attack Trump and nasty statements, and he calls it a campaign on the Democrat side about nothing. And about Kamala Harris not answering policy questions and evading it. Tim Walz not much better. Tim, a confessed knucklehead, as Gil says. And former President Obama, he said, is not helping when he browbeats black men into voting for the vice president. And Gil says Trump is winning, having fun doing it. Who can forget him handing out burgers at McDonald's, mounting a garbage truck with a bright orange vest on, the curtains coming down on the campaign, and the polls indicate Democrats are labeling and smearing and insulting. But as far as issues, a campaign about nothing.
And the reason I found his article so funny is I think Gil did a really good job of matching up what you just said with one of my favorite shows of all time, Seinfeld, which was always labeled a show about nothing. And he took the characters of the Seinfeld show, especially George Costanza and the others, and related them to the people who are running for office. And I think it was, I'm not sure, it was a couple days ago already. I think he was comparing Walz to George Costanza.
Yeah,
I'd have to go back and review it again, but I got a chuckle when I read it.
He calls Walz, that character, fat and balding.
It was, and folks who follow the show would probably, or did follow the show, it's not been on for decades, but would get a kick out of some of the comparisons Gil made.
You bet. Trump is so effective, the people he brings on stage at his rallies. And in Salem, Virginia, he brought members of the Roanoke, Virginia College women's swim team on stage and let them talk. And they said they support Trump. He wants to get males out of female sports. It's dangerous, their physicality. And the team leader, captain, said on the stage with Trump, Trump wants to protect women as female athletes. We need that with men coming into our locker rooms and onto our teams. And Trump, we thank you for standing with women. Yes, protecting our rights. And the Roanoke swim team are standing up like other teams now for the rights, and they're forfeiting games rather than putting up with this atrocious male participation.
And the polling numbers show that most Americans share that view. And I think, obviously it cuts, there's a bit of a partisan cut to it, but even among people identifying themselves as Democrats, they do not support the idea of biological men competing against biological women in sports.
That's why I think Trump might have a landslide, because so many Democrat policies are so foolish that they are rejected by most voters and lots of Democrats. But people of color are supporting Trump, despite what Obama likes. The former vice president of the Navajo Nation endorses Trump. He said, President Trump, we want to be invited to your party and to the American dream. We want to be part of it, and we thank you for your leadership, and your term of office benefited us, and we want you back in office. Harris's failed leadership is not in our best interest, and we want to make Native America great again, and we want to join America great again in your movement.
I think that where you're going to, I mean, the polls show that, and it could be crucial in some of these swing states, an erosion of support among, as you said, people of color for the Democratic ticket, where in past elections it has been a nearly universal Democratic support, and they're seeing significant erosion according to the polls. Yeah, and that could have a major impact in some of these states where it's going to be really, really close.
That's why I think the polls are more on Trump's side than these close races that these poll takers say is occurring. I think they just want to keep it close for excitement. Former NFL quarterback and star Brett Favre left Mississippi and came up to Green Bay for Trump's rally there. And Favre was very well informed. He said, it's nice to be back in Green Bay. I support the president. We are not garbage. He knows that. I see police officers, teachers, nurses, grandparents, students supporting Trump. Make America great again. And Favre said this in Brown County, where Green Bay is, 50 people died of fentanyl overdoses. And so Favre was very effective and very well informed. And he said, yeah, as Trump is saying, Kamala broke it. Trump will fix it. And Favre said, I've lived the American dream. I want other people to be able to do that too.
So I wonder, is Favre have as much pull in Wisconsin as he used to because of his departure from the team and his stint with the Minnesota Vikings, or is he still beloved?
Oh, he's beloved. There's a big crowd cheering him, and Rodgers, I think, has left with distaste in Green Bay. Evidently, he left Green Bay because he didn't like when the management brought Love on as a backup quarterback, and he got so small-minded about it that he left. Well, now he's with the Jets, and he's accomplishing nothing.
And also, as far as personalities are concerned, Rodgers has, I don't know, a bit more of a temperament, perhaps, than Favre, that might have turned the tide against him as far as public opinion. But when it comes to endorsements, just last night, Joe Rogan, the podcaster who attracts audiences in the millions, it's quite the phenomena that he has this unbelievably large audience. His audience dwarfs that of CNN, MSNBC, even Fox on many occasions. He puts out a podcast, the one he did with former President Trump. I think it was well over 20 million people watched it, at least a portion of what was a 3-hour-long interview with the former president. In-depth discussions. He endorsed Trump last night.
You did?
I don't know he's actually really endorsed anybody before. I mean, for him to wait until the last minute to do that. But his audience is a lot of young males. And the polling shows that Trump is very popular in that demographic. And if his endorsement, the question is, will those young males go out and actually cast a ballot? Because the young vote is the most unreliable demographic there is as far as voting is concerned. They're very fickle, whether or not they're going to participate in an election. Young women predominantly support Harris.
Yeah.
So if they're motivated and show up to vote, it's going to greatly benefit Harris. But if those young men who feel disaffected, they show up to vote, that'll be a big, big win for Trump moving forward. And Rogan's endorsement, I think, could play a significant part of whether or not those young men get out and vote.
Well, males are demonized by the Democrats, toxic males, toxic testosterone, and they're demonized in colleges too, and I think they are they are going to vote. And, it's just, and then there's some voting issues still. The Pentagon evidently is being criticized because soldiers overseas, military personnel, male and female, are not getting the absentee ballots that they want and that they've asked for. There's a deficit there. They're complaining they're not getting the absentee ballots to vote before Election Day, and of course today is Election Day. And some congressmen have sent a letter to Secretary of Defense Austin citing their grave concern for deficiencies in Defense Department protocols. I've read that in other elections, that somehow veterans' votes are usually, for the conservative side, and it's been an issue for a couple of elections. But how to register, how to get the ballot, how to go through it, it's just not being taken care of by the Pentagon, and the military personnel are complaining.
They should be complaining. If that is actually happening, that's pretty outrageous. That people who are putting their lives on hold and serving their country are being, I guess, not thwarted, but being facing difficulties in exercising the right to vote. One more thing before we take the break. We do have to take a break. I guess I'm the one who continually brings up these polls. And I've read more and more articles, and this goes back the last few election cycles, that the polls have been off, and they have been off significantly. And the main feature of their deficits is their inability to accurately count the Trump vote. Going back to 2016, they have significantly undercounted Trump's support among the population. And even in 2020, where Trump lost by a narrow margin, the polls had Biden winning by a much more significant margin. They had Hillary easily winning the 2016 election, which she lost. And there's very little confidence out there amongst analysts that these polling companies have adequately come up with ways to accurately count that Trump vote, because some Trump supporters are reticent to express their support. Your ability to get people to participate in these polls has become much more difficult with cell phone technology screening calls. Most people don't pick up the phone when it rings and it's a number they don't recognize. Oftentimes that unrecognizable number, which could be a pollster calling, gets labeled as spam. They can't get people on landline phones anymore because so few people have those landlines anymore. And it's a very, very specific demographic that still has the landlines. And even finding those folks willing to participate in these online or even telephone surveys has grown more and more difficult. So they have to use fancy algorithms to try to extrapolate from a smaller and smaller sample what's actually going on out there. Mm-hmm. Weighting certain demographics within the polling sample, and ultimately that comes down to guesswork, whether or not they're guessing correctly or not. And in the past election cycles, they've guessed wrong. So it'll be interesting once again to see if these polling outfits came anywhere close to reality in this election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's take a quick break for news. We'll come back with a few more minutes, more Rochester Today on Election Day 2024 at News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96 Nobly.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Welcome back. We have a few more minutes. Rochester Today with Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell, and we always want to cover things happening internationally, Tom.
How complex that Ukraine war is. Trump said he'll settle it if he's president. Zelensky better do it, to show pro-Putin priests,
Orthodox
St. Michael's Cathedral in Ukraine, got in a physical brawl with priests who are pro-Ukraine, pro-Putin priests at this cathedral, fighting literally, chairs, fists, everything, with the other priests who are on the other side of the issue.
Wow.
And that church is part of the Russian Orthodox church too, by the way. So, but the pro-Kiev clergy clashed with the pro-Putin clergy. Actual physical fighting in the church between the clerics. Isn't that something? Ukraine President Zelensky is very critical of Western leaders. They're slow with the weapons responses and spending. He thinks the West is losing interest in his war, and he's really upset about what he calls the zero response to Putin using North Korean troops in Russia near the Ukraine border. Zelensky said the West has not responded to that. They're not doing anything about it. And Zelensky says our troops have made contact with the North Koreans, and has been firing back and forth in the Russian region of Kursk, where Ukrainian troops are, and they had a clash already. Zelensky's very concerned about that, the significance of it, the escalation of it. Where's Western response to that?
But I question what could that response be? I don't know. Additional sanctions. Obviously, the West is not going to use a military response in Russia and spark an even wider conflict in that region. Everybody's on tiptoes because of the geopolitical issues involved in this. I saw China is even upset about the North Korean troops being in Russia, because even though Russia and China currently have an alliance, which appears to be a fairly strong alliance, those two countries have also been very, very wary of each other historically, with the huge border that they share.
Yeah.
And I've read articles that within the Chinese Communist Party that there is some nervousness about the North Koreans getting in bed with the Russians to this extent.
And South Korea is very concerned about what the North Koreans are doing too. And as Zelensky said, if the West does not act against Russian resort to North Korean troops, Russia might bring troops in from other nations and adversaries like Iran. And then Zelensky wants South Korea to join the U.S., Europe, and the United Kingdom as in a pro-Ukrainian defensive alliance. Well, that would expand the war, although I think North Korea's presence expands the war, too.
It does. It obviously does. Well, the other conflict we haven't talked about is the ongoing Middle East conflict, and I read a new assessment. This is U.S. intelligence officials who will not be named, obviously sources, that the effectiveness of the Israeli attacks on Iran were far more than initially reported, that the Israelis have set back the Iranians at least a year or more in their ability to produce ballistic missiles, have more or less crippled their air defenses, and there are some within the Iranian regime who are calling for a strong retaliation against the Israelis because of how bad the damage was from what the Israelis did. But then it opens up that the message being that you can't protect yourself, Iran. The Israelis have the ability to hit anywhere and anytime they wish.
Right. So Iran will insist on continuing to poke the bear, and it's been destabilized by this attack. So if they attack Israel again, they're going to get more of the same and have very little infrastructure.
Yep, military infrastructure specifically. Well, we have to run, Tom.
Okay.
The clock says so. I know it's a dreary day, but I urge everybody to participate in the election and exercise your right as an American citizen. This is what it's all about. If you this is the day to be patriotic on. Our system of governance set up well over 200 years ago by our founding fathers, who had the wisdom to develop a system to peacefully resolve our disputes through the ballot box and decide who our leaders will be. It's something we should all celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, check the website late tonight. We'll have obviously coverage of the local election results. And stay tuned for what happens nationally, I guess. Mm-hmm. We'll talk to you Thursday about that, Tom. I look forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Tom Ostrom's here. I'm Andy Brownell. This has been Rochester Today. Everybody have a great day on News Talk 1340 KROC AM 96.